episode 291 of the CRICKETher Weekly, sponsored by, you can't even see it, I'd be terrible at doing sponsorship deals, it's a can of Pepsi. We've just finished England v India and I'm quite tired and just
incoherent.
Those
Incoherent.
close ones are quite difficult because you have all of that adrenaline surging through you. And then obviously the adrenaline comes out as you write your report, and then the adrenaline sort of surges away and you're left in a state of exhaustion. Goodness only knows how the players deal with it, Sid. Anyway.
Well, the players don't have to at least file a report at 5 minutes after the play finishes.
No,
in a match where you don't know the outcome.
No.
Into the last over. I mean,
India
could still have won it in the last over.
Yeah.
It didn't look very likely by that point.
No.
I mean, what, field 14 off the last over?
Yeah.
And Lindsay Smith, who has bowled brilliantly for this whole tournament, and it's her economy rate that's been key to it. And England kept her in the bag, bowled her that last over. That was all part of the plan, according to Natsir Brunt after the game. And she did a great job. Ultimately, India just left themselves a little bit too much to do at the end there.
And I thought what you said in your piece was really interesting, Sid. It was that there was a kind of irony in the fact that it was Dipti Sharma's innings that kept India in the hunt, but it was also potentially Dipti Sharma's innings which left them that little bit too much to do at the end and meant that they just couldn't afford to make any mistakes. And so when she holed out, then that was basically game over because the two batters underneath her just had too much to do.
Yeah, they needed to be going at just over a run a ball, and she gave them an innings of 50 at just under a run a ball, and it just wasn't quite enough. So yeah, ironic that it kept them in touch, but it was also what left the Amanjot and Sneha Rana just that too much to do at the end. It's that the pressure on a batter at that point is just like absolutely huge because you can't afford to make any mistakes, especially India kind of went into this game with 3 number 11s, so there wasn't anything to come, and Amanjot and Sneha knew that over those last 3 overs, so they didn't feel like they felt comfortable taking the risks that at that point they needed to take.
They did need to take them because it was over a run a ball, and that was the thing that Dipti didn't quite manage to keep it. After Smriti Mandana got out, Dipti did not quite manage to keep it under a run a ball, and that's what makes it tough when you're coming in underneath her, is you've actually got to hit boundaries. And actually we heard from Heather Knight that even though this was a much better batting track than the ones that England had previously played on, it still wasn't the easiest batting track to get into straight away. The bounce was a little bit slow, a little bit uneven, and just a little bit tricky, I think. And especially with somebody like Lindsay Smith coming on, who is a really good death bowler.
Yeah, no, Lindsay's been fantastic. Well, the power play bowler and a death bowler.
Yeah.
So, that's great stuff. England have really been looking for that and missing that kind of death bowling since, Freya Davis was discarded. And, now Lindsay's kind of really fitting that role. So that's positive news. But I think a lot of less positive news for England. Charlotte Edwards said in her press conference yesterday that she was not concerned about the batting. And if she really wasn't concerned, I mean, Lottie is always playing a game of these things. She's very, very aware of that playing the media is a game, and she's sitting there, humming tunes on her violin.
The other thing is that she's got to be aware of, or that it feels like she's aware of what people are inside the dressing room are going to think when they hear what she
absolutely.
says.
If she goes saying, our batters are all rubbish, actually. Yeah.
Well, as soon as we get back to England, they're being put in the bin.
But it was a tad concerning. I mean, Heather Knight is played really well today, but she increasingly looks just like John McCain at the end of the Die Hard movies, where she's absolutely covered in scars and limping along, but still somehow manages to, get through and take out the bad guys.
Yeah, it was a great innings from her today. This was obviously much more convincing than her previous effort against Bangladesh, which was kind of hit under, I guess, like similar sort of under pressure circumstances. But that one was really, she had 3 let-offs. This one was that she just looked good and managed to find a way to hit boundaries. A lot of kind of boundaries hit behind square, sweeping and reverse sweeping, and being able to nudge the ball into those gaps. And so it was a really good innings.
Yeah, I mean, it was very hard work with her. It was very hard work for her. I do wonder if she'll look back at that and go, this shows just what hard work it is now. And I wonder if, to a certain extent, that innings actually brings on her retirement a bit closer. because she looks at that and goes, that is actually really tough to get to do that now at my age.
Well, I think it will very much depend on what happens to England in the rest of this tournament, right? Because everyone wants to go out on a high. So if England could go on and win this World Cup, then that might precipitate an earlier retirement, potentially. I would still think that England are not massively well placed to go on and win this tournament, in the sense of, their batting today, Heather Knight and Nat Silver aside, again, was not brilliant. They obviously did have a slightly higher opening partnership today against India, but they just had a massive middle order collapse again. And really, they should have got more runs on the board than 288. And we'll look back on it now. You can look back on it and go, well, they won the match, so what was the problem? But that's not going to cut it against Australia. And if they're going to win the World Cup, they're going to have to win against Australia at least once. Not necessarily in their next group stage game.
They
that's
might not
fine.
have to, of course, because they're looking increasingly like there's going to be Australia and India in the semi-finals.
Okay, interesting.
So maybe India knock Australia out again, and then England end up facing. So my guess is now, looking at the table and where we're at with it, is that Australia will play India in one semi-final, and England will play South Africa in the other one.
Okay.
So you can definitely see a scenario where England end up playing India in the final, and can repeat the trick perhaps.
Yeah, I suppose.
But I'd still give India more odds. I mean, India have now lost 3 games, and yet overall you feel India have looked far more convincing, because England have lost
you mean?
than England. Yeah, because India have lost. One game to Australia where Australia completed the highest chase of all time. One game to South Africa where one player played an absolutely fantastic innings, Nadine de Klerk at the end. And then this game to England, which was, a tough game, and India played really well and they got really close. They just didn't quite have enough at the end. If England had, posted 20 runs less, then, India would have won this game. So, India, despite those defeats, I think that they still look, a team that could win this World Cup.
Okay, so on that basis, India. What do India have to do now to get to the semi-finals? Because we've got 3 semi-finalists at the time that we're recording, right?
Yeah.
Australia obviously got there first, then South Africa, and now England have qualified for the semi-finals. But India might not even get to the semi-finals now.
They might not, but if India win their last 2 games, they're definitely qualified. So India have got Bangladesh and New Zealand to come, and they're definitely qualified. The thing that's kind of standing in their way is that if New Zealand win their last 2 games, then they will also definitely be qualified. Unfortunately for the tournament, India-New Zealand isn't the last game, it's their penultimate game, so they'll each have another game afterwards. So the loser of that could sit there hoping that the other one will slip up, and then we get into if this happens and this happens and this happens territory. One of the really weird things about India's situation today is actually that, to a certain extent, today's result didn't matter. That in terms of qualification, in terms of getting at least 4th place, even if India had won today, they would still need to win their last 2 games to guarantee qualification. Yeah. So kind of a weird thing taken, partly because
they weren't really fighting it out with England for the last semi-final spot, right?
Yeah, and partly also because of the impact of the way that these World Cups are run, where the games won makes a difference, which means if you have games rained off, if teams like New Zealand have had games rained off, then those games kind of count against you, because that's not a one game.
Okay.
So games won counts above net run rate.
Okay, interesting. Can we talk a bit about South Africa then? Because so they're the team that based on most things happening that are most likely, you think England are going to face in the semi-final. And that was kind of, you might go, well, England bowled them out for 69 last time. Let's advance jollily, merrily, easily to the final if we get that semi-final matchup. What do you reckon?
It's a couple of things. Possibly that's the kind of thing that Australia thought in the T20 World Cup a year ago. And
good point.
Didn't work out quite so well
good
for
point.
them. They possibly underestimated South Africa. What we've seen really is that South Africa's match against England really was an aberration. They actually qualified for the semi-finals before England did, partly because of the order of the matches, but they did it before England did, despite having had that humiliating reverse. So a couple of things. They've come back from that. That can't be an easy thing to come back from, and that speaks to kind of good management and good leadership within the team. I've got to say that, you know, we were kind of collectively, everyone was a little bit sceptical about Laura Wolfart's leadership. In terms of the fact it felt like they were kind of falling back on, oh, let's give it to the best player because, you know, we're not really convinced about anybody else. And, you know, we know that Laura Wolfart is really smart. She's very clever. You know, she's just completed a degree that she's completed like while being a professional cricketer at the same time. And, you know, before becoming a cricketer, she was destined to become a doctor, and she was kind of nailed on to, you know, she was like the smartest kid in her school, which was one of the top schools in South Africa. And she was nailed on to go to university and become a doctor and things. So she's a very, very book smart person. But I think we were a bit sceptical about whether, you know, she was the right person to captain the team. But, you know, the leadership to come back from that and to, you know, to pull out the wins that they have done subsequently, that's impressive. So, you know, good for them.
Okay, so what you're saying is that they definitely will give England the run for their money in a semi-final.
I think absolutely they will, yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah.
All right, that's really interesting. I mean, I think England will take a lot of confidence, obviously, from beating India. But the concern is maybe that they use that win to sort of paper over the cracks in the batting lineup. And it really so much feels like Nats to the Brunt.
Like we've seen this film before.
And Heather. Well, you know, when we critique the West Indies, we look at them and we say, well, you get Hayley Matthews out, that's the ball game. But nobody seems to quite turn it back on England and go, well, you get Nat Sither-Brunt and Heather Knight out, then that's the ball game. And it almost feels just as inevitable these days. So I just think you can't let one really close win against India. And in my view, the match against India, they really won with the ball, not with the bat.
Yeah, I agree with that. It was about holding their nerve in the last 10 overs.
Exactly. You can't let that overshadow these really deep-seated issues with the bat, about which I wrote a column for The Guardian this week. And it's always a bit nerve-wracking writing a column when they're about to go and play a game and you think, well, and then obviously they go and put 288 on the board.
It could make you look like a total banana.
Yeah, but I don't think, even though they did get 288, I just don't feel like anything that I wrote in that column is actually invalid. Anyway, let's move on, Sid, to talking about rain. Okay, there's been quite a lot of rain this week in various different places around the world,
mostly
but
in Colombo.
Specifically in relation to the World Cup in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Now, England obviously had a rain-affected, well, it wasn't even a game, it didn't constitute a match in the end against Pakistan this week. Let's talk about that first, because there were some weird kind of rain regulations at play here. Well, I say weird, I mean, these are the rain regulations. So it just felt a bit odd because England batted for 25 overs. They were 79 for 7, then everyone went off for rain, and then England came back out and batted for, I think it was 6 more overs, and then obviously the match could not be completed because Pakistan could not then fit in the required 20 overs with the bat that were necessary to actually, for it to constitute a match. Pakistan were absolutely well on course to chase down their targets, and everyone from Pakistan was incredibly disappointed. Everyone from England breathed a sigh of relief and then got on the plane to Indore, and here we are. But a massive let-off for England. But I suppose the more broad point, Sid, is that do the rain regs in that situation need a rethink?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, clearly, if the umpires had the discretion, or the umpires and perhaps the match referee between them all had the discretion to kind of look at the weather forecast and go, look, we'll get on for maybe another hour here, but then it's coming back. Then they could have just sent Pakistan out and said, Pakistan, you've got 20 overs to score whatever you need to score via Duckworth-Lewis. And they
Don't forget Stern.
Duckworth-Lewis.
He gets very stern when you forget him.
And they would have completed the game at that point, because if you take out the 6 overs and the fact that there would have been no innings break, there would have been time for them to complete a game. As it stands, the umpires and the match referee don't have that discretion because the rules aren't written that way. I guess that, you know, it's a difficult one because the rules are written to deliberately give people no discretion, because what you don't want is teams putting pressure on the match referee or the umpire to, you know, carry out a particular course of action. So you don't want Pakistan putting pressure on the match referee to decide, to make that decision, to make that call.
Yeah, you mean a la Matthew Mott and Meg Lanning.
Well, a little bit like that.
2020.
I mean, that's not quite.
I'm not meant to talk about that.
Not quite the same thing. But what we're referring to here is that Australia were facing South Africa in the World Cup semi-final.
And if it had been a washout,
Australia wouldn't have gone through.
Yeah.
And the Australian kind of leadership team, and Matthew Mott and Meg Lanning and co, were almost literally going out and dragging super soppers they were literally standing on the outfield, directing the ground staff with the super soppers, going, stop some more.
They got the match on, just about. By some miracle, the rain cleared long enough just for the match to go ahead anyway. Sorry, that's a little bit of a red herring here, isn't it? But I think it shows.
So I understand why there are regulations in place, but it does really feel like a pity that people, don't have the option of deciding that and letting these games be finished, because we've had far too many games be washed out in Colombo. Now, the other thing people are saying is, why is this being held in Colombo? Because Colombo has 19 rainy days in a typical October. It's the most rainy month of the entire year in Colombo. There are more rainy days in October in Colombo than there are in Manchester. Manchester only has 17 rainy days a year.
Oh, well,
so we'd literally been better off if we'd held these matches at Old Trafford.
Let's do it.
But of course, the problem is that it wasn't really realistic. And for once, I am not going to blame the ICC for this.
Just to say, it's 4 out of 9 matches so far in Colombo that have been washed out. So
actually,
almost 50%.
But actually, they've done better than you might have expected.
Yeah. Well, they've tried really hard.
They're supposed to get 60% of them rained off.
Okay, so we're beating the odds in women's cricket.
Yeah.
Hurrah.
But I don't hold the ICC responsible for this, actually. It was a really difficult situation because obviously they couldn't hold the matches in Manchester. Where else do you hold them? Do you hold them in Bangladesh? Because, we've only a year ago, we had to move the tournament out away from Bangladesh because they were in a situation of political turmoil and it wasn't safe for anyone to go there. You obviously can't hold the matches in Pakistan. You can't hold them in the UAE because it's not realistic to play 50 over matches in those temperatures. We saw that 20 over matches in those temperatures at the World Cup last year was almost too much. Where were the ICC's options? They didn't really have a lot of option, and so we are where we are.
I think that's interesting. I personally think that you could have actually moved the entire tournament out of India, because you're talking about countries that are adjacent to India, basically, aren't you? Adjacent enough to India that you can have a dual hosting, which is the situation that they've got. I mean, you could have moved the whole tournament wholesale to South Africa, let's say, or Australia, for example. That would have obviously been very disappointing for India, because it's their tournament and they've been prepping for ages to host it. It's also completely unrealistic, given what we know about the sway that the BCCI have over the governance of global cricket. So yeah, we know that wouldn't have been considered. But I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, I suppose the other thing is the point that Sophie Devine raised after their match against Pakistan was washed out, which was really disappointing because they really had Pakistan on the ropes, and we know that New Zealand they've still got a small hope of qualifying for the semi-finals.
Oh yeah, they win their last few matches. They will qualify. Yeah.
So that washout against Pakistan really deeply disappointing for them. And obviously, Sophie Devine. One great thing about having announced your retirement and being basically at the back end of your career is you can just say what you like now. You don't have to worry about being political or kind of trying to, say what the ICC want you to say. And she just came out and said, yeah, it's really disappointing. And, you've waited for so long. You want to test yourself against the best. To be scuppered by the rain, it's a real shame. She said, why can't they play the games in the morning, Colombo time? Because I don't understand weather systems. I'm not a weather person. But apparently it's much more likely that the rain comes in the late afternoon, evening, which is specifically when they've scheduled these matches for. And the reason they've done that is because it's more broadcaster friendly. But why not, when things are going badly and when you've got rain forecast for these specific times for all of these matches, why not take a decision to move them forward a few hours?
I mean, yeah, I guess the bottom line is the broadcasters would go ballistic if you moved them at the last minute. I can see how we ended up here. I guess the whole point is that kind of we go in optimistically, don't we? So we schedule these games in Colombo optimistically, going, well, fingers crossed we'll get all these matches played, and fingers crossed we'll hit the 11 days in October when it doesn't rain, and all will be well.
And all has not been well.
But it hasn't quite been.
And it's very disappointing. And it just feels like women's cricket, or cricket, I should say, because the people who have organised this are not the women's cricket people, they're the men's cricket people, basically, aren't they? Just shoots itself in the foot. And it's only concerned about broadcast revenue. So,
well, I wonder how much broadcast revenue they're making though. Well, it
that's
doesn't really matter to the
It's
ICC because
spectacle.
people have paid their money now. But you know, ultimately, obviously, fans are not watching. Now they'll literally turn off, which means the broadcast advertising revenue falls. And
Anyway, okay, right. Well, England v India, done and dusted. And shall we go and, I don't know, have a rest now, Sid?
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed the England v India match as much as we did. It's certainly kind of one of the most thrilling games this World Cup. Let's hope for a few more, although not too many more, just for the sake of our sanity.
Well, India New Zealand's a big one, so make sure you turn on Thursday for India New Zealand, because that's going to be the key game left in the group stages.
Fantastic. Right, thanks for tuning in. See you next week.
Bye.